Welcome to Talking Tariffs Tuesdays. First, first, I want to point out what I read this week about supposedly George's early protege was this guy Michael Flersheim. Of course, it's spelled differently later. There's no C, and there is a C. Uh, but he got really into monetary reform, and then where's him and some others. Maybe it was up here. They basically said that going after tariffs uh, was a big reason the single tax movement lost momentum. Yeah, here we go. The intermixture of tariff legislation and land reform has thus done a great deal of harm, especially in the United States and the British colony. And this is the trap, they're saying. It was a trap to go after tariffs and become associated primarily with tariffs. Um, the single tax. Single tax. Here's what Flersheim says. You still continue attacking at the wrong place, the cause of my irritation. You are the general and I am forced to follow. How happy you would make me if you would allow me to point out the best point of attack for your splendid sword. Single tax. So that all is kind of funny that maybe some of the momentum was lost because the single tax movement started talking a little too much about tariffs instead of the single tax. Because, as we have said here on Talking Tariffs Tuesdays a number of times, abolishing the tariffs doesn't get you free trade. Free trade requires free land, using the land in usufruct, usus and fructus, being able to profit off of it, and being able to use it so long as it is not damaged. Um, Nonetheless, I do think it is good to read what George did say about tariffs. I do think tariffs are a bad tax. Are they the worst tax? Probably not. I don't know. It all depends on the severity and what other taxes are happening. Yeah. And then I've just been thinking a lot about rational ignorance being just about the biggest challenge in reform. For instance, I got an email celebrating the CEQA reform from an Orange County housing nonprofit. And then there's also this discussion in the California Common Ground Discord about people understanding this CEQA change, and then talking about there's Housing Bill AB 130, and there's also another bill AB 131, and some of these are good and some of this is bad, and I don't even know uh, what to think about it all. Um, yeah, so it is what it is. Why do I keep what do I want to do? Well, let's read chapter 15 of advantages and disadvantages as reasons for protection. We have seen that low wages do not mean low cost of production, and that a high standard of wages, instead of putting a country at a disadvantage in production, is really an advantage. I don't like the way he phrases that. The high wages themselves are not an advantage, but they are indicative of labor being more powerful and more productive. So I wouldn't call the wages themselves, or I wouldn't call a high standard of wages uh, an advantage. I would say they are a signal of an advantage. I don't know. That is assuming other regulations, not what's involved with sort of artificially raising the standard of wages, but yeah. All else equal, I suppose you could say, between two nations, holding everything else constant uh, in terms of their everything. But then again, if you hold everything constant in terms of their everything, then how it seems really arbitrary that the higher wages would or lower wages. You have to say, because I want to say that, yeah, just going in circles now. So we'll say holding uh, the policies of each nation constant. Then higher wages is indicative of more productive labor, which you might call an advantage. We made it through one sentence. George writes, this disposes of the claim that protection is rendered necessary by high wages by showing the invalidity of the first assumption upon which it is based. But it is worth while to examine the second assumption in this claim, that production is determined by cost, so that a country of less advantages cannot produce if the free competition of a country of greater advantages be permitted. All right, this is our new claim. We're gonna examine. Production is determined by cost, so that a country with less advantages cannot produce if the free competition of a country of greater advantages be permitted. I guess by advantages he just means I mean, if by advantages here he means the same thing uh, as the advantages up here, well, we have conflicting definitions of advantages. He says up here that the protectionists call it an advantage um, to have low wages, and he's saying no, it's an advantage to have high wages. And so when he says advantages right here, I don't know which way he's applying that. If this is a claim from the protectionists, you would assume them to be meaning a country of less advantage means that it costs more to produce, means it's a country with higher wages. And a country with greater advantages, according to protectionist, is a country with low wages. So that's the way I'm going to take this claim. The claim is from protectionists. The claim is that production is determined by cost, and then therefore, maybe not even, yeah, therefore, a country with lower wages, or well, a country with higher wages cannot produce when they have to compete with a country of lower wages. So in his time, that would mean the USA is a country of disadvantage because it has high wages, according to protectionists. And so they wouldn't be able to compete with countries with low wages, because that gives those countries an advantage. George already says that he doesn't think that that's the correct way to connect wages to advantage, but that's what the protectionists, I think, are saying. Okay, we made it through 2 sentences. For while we are sometimes told that a country needs protection because of great natural advantages, okay, now this is a different kind of advantage, natural, that ought to be developed, we are at other times told that protection is needed because of the sparseness of population. Okay, so would that count as a natural disadvantage? So a country needs protection because it has a natural advantage, and other times we're told it needs protection because it has a natural disadvantage. Maybe. The want of capital or machinery or skill. Oh, another reason it needs a protection. Or because of high taxes or a high rate of interest. Okay. Talking about interest here, the higher rate of interest in the United States than in Great Britain has until recently been one of the stock reasons of American protectionists for demanding a high tariff. There's so much for us to consider. And I'm reading this, I'm thinking about it. At best, you're sitting on the edge of your seat paying very close attention, maybe even reading along, but pretty unlikely. And we'll finish this book, and we won't probably continue our study of tariffs for quite some time, and our ignorance will creep back in, maybe. We do not hear so much of this now, that the rate in New York is as low as in London, if not lower, but we hear no less of the need for protection. Okay, so early protectionists were saying uh, there's a high rate of interest in the U.S., so that's why U.S. needs protection. And now the rate of interest in George's time is about the same in New York and London, England, Britain, and America. But it seems like we have no less need for protection. It is hardly necessary in this discussion to treat of the nature and law of interest, a subject which I have gone over in Progress and Poverty. It may, however, be worthwhile to say that a high rate of interest, where it does not proceed from insecurity, that is, compensation for risk, I'm guessing, which is not properly termed interest, if that's what he means here. So a true high rate of interest is not to be regarded as a disadvantage. And if you read Progress and Poverty with us, we know that interest is the return to capital, and that scales as the what's the word? As wages goes up, because capital is but saved up wages. I mean, saved up labor. Wages is the return to labor. As labor gets more and more valuable, then it also you need there to be a higher and higher interest rate to motivate people to store up labor, because labor is costly, so capital is costly. So the return to capital has to be increasing to make it worth actually storing up capital. That's what I remember. I think that makes sense. So where there is a high rate of interest, it shouldn't be regarded as a disadvantage, just like where there is high wages. George says it shouldn't be regarded as a disadvantage. It should be evidence, but rather as evidence of the large returns to the active factors of production, excuse me. The active factor being labor, Capital is stored up. Labor. Those are the active factors of production. The passive factor being land. See if he mentions that. But yeah, the active factors of production, labor and capital. Returns which diminish as rent rises. Yes, because rent is the return to land, and rent plus, which is the return to land, plus the return to labor and capital, total the return to production, and it's sort of a zero-sum game. So if land is getting more and more of the return to production, then labor and capital are getting less and less. So we should take it when there's a high rate of interest that is evidence of large returns to labor and capital. And then he notes that these diminish as rent rises and landowner gets a larger share of the production. Simply for, what does a landlord do? They just permit labor and capital to actually work. Land ownership is non-productive. Cool. That's his aside on people trying to argue that the high rate of interest indicates that we need protection. When the high rate of interest signals something just like a high wage, which is that this is a place where labor is very productive. And then he finishes this sentence, or other conditions which it may be involve real disadvantage. And these are all supposed reasons that a country needs protection. Natural advantage, or natural disadvantage, sparseness of population. I don't know if that you would call that natural. In this context, it seems like natural advantage seems to mean non-human natural resources and their distribution, I guess. Okay, we made it through a paragraph. 19 minutes. But without reference to the reality of the alleged advantage or disadvantage, all these special pleas for protection are met when it is shown, as it can be shown, that whatever be its advantages or disadvantage for production, a country can always increase its wealth by foreign trade. Oh, that's a pretty good sentence paragraph. And this is something I kind of like to do in discussion a lot of times when somebody's arguing for a point, and you're like, okay, even if I do disagree with you, but even if I grant that you're right, so in this case, George is like, you guys are really confused over what's an advantage and a disadvantage. But even if some of these things are advantageous and some of these things are disadvantageous, a country always increases its wealth by foreign trade. Now I could anticipate, as I can anticipate, like my counter argument, which isn't exactly a counter argument, but my response to almost all of the book, as I've done a bajillion times, which is you get rid of tariffs and you do not implement a land value tax, then the land and resource owners will make even more money because removing the tariffs will improve the efficiency of trade, but a larger pie that the landlords get the big slice of is kind of not that big of a deal to the workers who are, at best, maybe their slice will increase a small amount, but their proportional slice will continue to decrease. If we suppose two countries, each of which is for any reason at a decided disadvantage in some branch of production, in which the other has a decided advantage. All right, this is without loss of generality. Let one country have an advantage, and then, it's by definition the other country is disadvantaged. All right, so there's some disparity in advantage. Then it is evident that the free exchange of commodities between them will be mutually beneficial. by enabling each to make up for its own disadvantage by availing itself of the advantage of the other, just as the blind man and lame man did in the familiar story. I would probably even go a step further and say that even if one country is sort of better in all things, um, there's still an advantage to these two countries trading, just like if you suppose two men and one man is better at every activity, um, it still makes sense for the two to trade because man number one can do the most important or most valuable things with all his time. You know, he can go be a whatever we all agree on is most valuable, being a doctor, I guess. That's what my dad does. And then the other, and you would rather your doctor just become a super good doctor than spending time learning how to be a plumber. And yet, you don't want the doctor's uh, toilet getting clogged up, and then the doctor can't be a doctor anymore. So then the other man can become a plumber. And I think you can do a similar thing with two countries if one has an advantage, and even if it has no disadvantage. Anyway, uh, George continues. Trade between them will give to each country a greater amount of all things than it could otherwise obtain with the same quantity of labor. Such a case resembles that of two workmen, each having as to some things skill superior to the other, and who, by working together, each devoting himself to that part for which he is the better fitted, can accomplish more than twice as much as if each worked separately. You know, there's this other thing I might bring up, because I'm always talking about how we have these bloated corporations in the U.S. Um, and like this general assumption that, two people working together can produce more than each one working apart. In lots of circumstances, there's like a diminishing return, and then perhaps even so. Like let's say two people can produce. So one person by himself can make $100 a day, or $100 of value. The other two people together can make, let's say, $201 of value. So a net gain of one. And then they say three people can do 300 and three. So any two, if they paired up, they would make 201, and the other guy would make 100. So that would be 301. So it's better that all three work together than just a pair and an extra guy. And it's clearly better that at least two work together, and it's best if all three work together, right? We could imagine this sort of like if 10 people work together, you know, maybe they even can make, so if they all worked apart, 10 people, 10 times 100 is 1,000. But let's say when 10 people work together, they're just super duper efficient, and they can actually produce $2,000 of good. They're like doubling. And we can suppose if 9 people work together and one alone, that is less than the 2,000 total produce, and 8 people and 2 people, whatever. So we're saying 10 people working together. But there's probably a point in most industries when a firm has like 100 people and they're able to produce, you know, so you need Well, let's stick with our 10 people producing um, 2,000. We could suppose we could keep adding a person and it would go up by some amount greater than um, 100. But we can suppose there's a point at which you get so bloated that adding one more person is probably not as good as that person either maybe not working alone, but maybe at some point breaking off. Like if there's this sweet spot of 10 people who can produce 2,000, and then we get to like diminishing returns, and you're starting to get up to like 30, 40, 50 people. At some point, it might be better to break off 10 people to make their own firm. Um, that again hits that sort of sweet spot of $2,000 or $2,000, yeah, of value in a day. Why do I bring that up? I don't know. I guess I'm just saying the way these things scale isn't a foregone conclusion. So I think it's not necessarily true that because two people can produce more than twice as much as two separate people, that therefore everyone should, the whole world, everyone should always work together. Um, but I don't know. Now it's all tricky. 'Cause, I mean, like clearly each of those people has to trade with society for that. Like to even use the idea of dollars worth of value, you have to be part of a system. So I don't know what I'm thinking or feeling now. Just questioning these sort of ideas about economies of scale or inefficiency of cooperation groups. I don't know. Let us suppose two countries, one of which has advantages superior to the other for all the productions of which both are capable. Aha, this is all right. Thank you, George. This is what I was just saying. Well, that's what I was saying a paragraph ago. Um, then I got distracted by my own discussion of efficiency of labor and scale. All right, Janning shares a paper that doesn't open. I cannot read this PDF. You know, I was wondering the other day. PDF stands for document format, portable document format. Yes. Where were we? We could Google it. Roundaboutness between process A and process B. That's a fun, fun title word. Roundaboutness. Mises. Von Mises, which is an Austrian. I see. Roundaboutness, or roundabout methods of production, is the process whereby capital goods are produced first and then with the help of the capital goods, the desired consumer goods are produced. Roundaboutness states that more time-intensive and capital-rich methods of production may lead to greater long-run productivity, even if in the short run they are less productive. This idea ties closely to other ideas on the time value of money and interest rates, where interest is a premium paid for deferring consumption in the present. An argument against Baum-Bawerk's theory of roundaboutness in economics with compound interest was presented by Paul Samuelson during the Cambridge Capital controversy. The concept interpreted as rising technical composition of capital used by Marx and others. Yeah, I've not heard this term before, but I am sort of familiar with the concept from probably reading Thomas Sowell or something in my youth. Um, all right, well, we'll go on with George here. We're back to supposing one country has advantages superior to all the others. I feel like the econ term is like relative advantage or I don't know, but then you get specialization. So, trade between them being free, would one country do all the exporting and the other all the importing? That, of course, would be preposterous. Would trade then be impossible? Certainly not. Unless the people of the country of less advantages transferred themselves bodily to the country of greater advantages, trade would go on with mutual benefit. The people of the country of greater advantages would import from the country of less advantages those products as to which the difference of advantage between the two countries was least. Yes. Um, and then you could also suppose, what if their advantage in each thing was absolutely equal? Then it's sort of arbitrary. But yeah. Um, so they would import where the difference of advantages were least, and they would export in return those products as to which the difference was greatest. Okay, Janny, you found reflections on reswitching and roundaboutness. Roger and Garrison from Auburn. Oh, it doesn't work. Is this like maybe do is my I like was spending a bunch of time deleting a bunch of temporary files and just unused applications and a bunch of old folders from my PC, and I reset a bunch of browser settings. I wonder if my Adobe Acrobat Reader's out of date. I don't know. Does it work for you? Um, do I have some PDFs downloaded? This PDF works fine. Um, fine. Uh-oh. Yeah, when I'm trying to open things with this extension, that's why it's breaking. Let's just remove the extension off. There it is. There's our paper. My Adobe extension. Yep, I clicked on the link and it works now. It's my extension. Yeah, it works for you too. I see that, Jenny. I guess I might as well leave it open here to come back to it at some point. It's not too long. It's got some bullshit statistics in it, clearly. It's got math that the person writing it doesn't even understand, I'm sure. It's got oh, okay. I was gonna say, I looked here and the axis didn't start at 0. I was about to get mad and then I saw, okay, you showed us the 0. Maybe. Why is there an asterisk? He's not sure if he wrote this paper? All right. Back it to George. It would be preposterous if these two countries didn't trade. If there's relative advantages, George just assumes there's relative advantages in some fields, which it's pretty hard to imagine there not being. Then there will become a gradient of what's worth producing, and they produce that. And by this exchange, both peoples would gain. The people of the country of poorest advantages would gain by some part of the advantages of the other country, and the people of the country of greatest advantages would also gain, since by being saved the necessity of producing the things as to which their advantage was least, they could concentrate their energies upon the production of things in which their advantage was greatest. Yes. Imagine this like you had some dumb little brother and you had a whole bunch of chores to do, right? You can do everything better than your little brother, but as long as your little brother is a willing worker, together you can do all of your chores faster, right? This would resemble that of two workmen of different degrees of skill in all parts of their trade. Yes, and this is something like, oh, my little brother, he's actually still really bad at mopping, but it's his favorite thing to do, or the thing he's relatively best at because you don't want to see him try to clean the bathroom. So yeah, you make him mop. Um, this case was without two different workmen, two different skills, or that of a skilled workman and an unskilled helper. Yes, this is my brother and brother example. Maybe I should stop talking so much because George is just going to give me the examples that I try to come up with on my own. But I like talking. What can I say? Why else are we here except to talk tariffs on Tuesdays? Though the workman might be able to perform all parts of the work in less time than the helper, yes, apprentice and journeyman, spoken like an electrician. Although the title does not always indicate the skill, would you say? I don't know. Although it highly correlates. Yet there would be some parts in which the advantage of his superior skill would be less than in others, and as by leaving these to the helper he could devote more time to those parts in which the superior skill would be most effective, there would be, as in the former case, a mutual gain in their working together. However, does this retard the development of the apprentice? Does this prevent the apprentice from ever developing those skills? Does the apprentice have to wait for the journeyman to die before the apprentice ever gets to drive the tractor or, do the cool thing? This is part of the reason I'm not super interested in working for like a AAA video game company, because I would be stuck, working on doors forever when I want to be working on core gameplay design. There's other complications. Systems. It's not, yeah. I guess there's you could assume that the less skilled laborer would be able to sort of decide, at what point it's worth it for them to branch out on their own if they're not getting a chance to develop for their future. So these kinds of calculations for future return is still best mediated through liberty. And on average, the people who are most interested and maybe most capable of doing high skilled labor, probably self-selection is probably the best method for society to figure that out, because so much of developing high skill is about motivation and desire. So I would say, like in my case, I may be wrong, but I have high motivation, high desire to be a very skilled game designer. So I am sort of sacrificing a short-term temporal prioritization of, like, maybe in the short term I would be able to produce more value for society by working on a big video game where I'm just a little helper, but I am believing that by not doing that now, I'm developing what later will be a better ability to create value, and over the course of my life, the most value. However, when you look at individual cases, you can get all kinds of little exceptions. Because A, I might die tomorrow. B, I might have just totally misjudged my capabilities. Maybe I'm never going to be able to develop a high skill. Um, or C, something else. Who knows? Who knows? Mutual gain by working together. And you could imagine this all very easily applying to industries in different countries and the different firms taking, making bets on themselves as they see fit, you know. If they don't ever see themselves being able to reach the forefront of an industry, they are more conservative. If they have somebody in their company who invents something or comes up with something novel, maybe they see that as a chance to, I don't know, prioritize it. Thus, it is that neither advantages nor disadvantages afford any reason for restraining trade. In point of fact, there is no country which, as to all branches of production, can be said to have superior advantages. Yeah, it's a factual claim that I agree with. The conditions which make one part of the habitable globe better fitted for some productions, unfit it for others. And what is disadvantage for some kinds of production is generally advantage for other kinds. Even the lack of rain, which makes some parts of the globe useless to man, may, if invention ever succeeds in directly utilizing the power of the sun's rays, be found to be especially advantageous for certain parts of production. George loves his prediction about solar power, and he got it right. The advantages and disadvantages that come from the varying density of population, the special development of certain forms of industry, etc., are also largely relative. The most positive of all advantages in production, that which most certainly gives superiority in all branches, is that which arises from that general intelligence which increases with the increase of the comfort and leisure of the masses of the people, that is to say, with the increase of wages. And this hammers home his argument that high wages indicates an advantage, which is due to the general intelligence and efficiency and productivity of labor, which high wages points to. But I still take issue with saying that high wages is an advantage because it is not the advantage. It points to what is advantageous. Trade is always to the benefit of both parties. If it were not, there would be no disposition to carry it on. 100%. It's so, like, unless you want to do some really crazy linguistic gymnastics and argue that involuntary trade counts as trade, voluntary trade is by definition mutually beneficial. Unless you have people who don't know what is to their own benefit, which is an argument that people make. People don't know what's good for them, therefore we should have rule by the elite, and that's a whole different argument. Getting scammed. Yes. You're late to the show. Hi, Mom. And I feel like this has been good. I feel like I have really been able to dig into these things so far. And Yeah, you should you gotta go back and rewatch some time at some time. Um, although I am being the second adult in a course for underserved youth in how to make a website, and that's at 7, and I have to go to the bathroom. We can go. I only, we're squeezing. We'll keep it. We'll go as long as we can. And thus we see again the fallacy of the protectionist contention that if it takes no more labor to produce a thing in our country than elsewhere, we shall lose nothing by shutting out the foreign product. Even though we have to pay a higher price for the home product, that was the end of the sentence. And thus we see again the fallacy of the protectionist contention. Their contention is, if it takes no more labor to produce a thing in our country than elsewhere, we shall lose nothing by shutting out the foreign product, even though we have to pay a higher price for the home product. Yes, this contention is fallacious, as we just went through. The interchange of the products of labor does not depend upon differences of absolute cost, but of comparative cost. Goods may profitably be sent from places where they cost more labor to places where they cost less labor, provided, and this is the only case in which they ever will be sent, that a still greater difference in labor cost exists as to other things which the country desires to obtain, which the first country desires to obtain. I got a little confused during this sentence, but I feel like he's just sort of repeating what we've already covered. Yes, when there is a difference in advantage, that's what they will produce in trade, I think. Thus, tea, which Horace Greeley was fond of referring to as a production that might advantageously be naturalized in the United States by a heavy duty, could undoubtedly be produced in the United States at less cost of labor than in China, for in transportation to the seaboard, packing, etc., we could save upon Chinese methods. Yes, but there are other things, such as the mining of silver, the refining of oil, the weaving of cloth, the making of clocks and watches, as to which our advantage over the Chinese is enormously greater than in the growing of tea. Hence, by producing these things and exchanging them directly or indirectly for Chinese tea, in spite of the long carriage, that's fancy transportation of the goods. I never used carriage like that before. In spite of the long carriage, more tea for the same labor than we could get by growing our own tea. I guess what you would say in the modern era is because the U.S. can create such incredible technology and innovation that's why it's worth it for us not to devote ourselves to production of goods and have those shipped in from China. I would say things in the modern era are pretty skewed because most of our goods are, well, most of our services and invention is basically powered by copyright and patent, like the way we treat all of commercialized art and the way big tech is hinges on all of these artificial monopolies. Even though George liked copyright himself, I can't help but think that uh, digital copyright, at least copyright should only last like 10 years, and you shouldn't have any ability to sort of, I don't know what the word is, like scope creep your technology or scope creep your copyright. You shouldn't be able to design Mickey Mouse, design uh, what's his name? Willie? Steamboat Willie. And then sue everyone, which is demand their money with the power of the state, the sword of the state, for drawing Steamboat Willie. and then come up with a modification of Steamboat Willie, which you would have sued anybody for creating something like Mickey Mouse, and you would have said that's too close to Steamboat Willie. But you create your own version of Steamboat Willie and call it Mickey Mouse. And so then 100 years passes, and Steamboat Willie is now public domain, but you now have Mickey Mouse, which is still copyright. Um, and I think that kind of move has been made in all of our commercial art. Free Willy. um, and I think we've done the same thing in technology, and because we are and we have been the global superpower, militarily speaking, we have forced these other countries to grant our firms artificial monopoly. Shall I continue? Sure. Consider how this principle, that the interchange of commodities is governed by the comparative, not the absolute, but by the comparative cost of production, applies to the plea that protective duties are required on account of home taxation. It is, of course, true that a special tax placed upon any branch of production puts it at a disadvantage, unless a like tax is placed upon the importation of similar productions. Okay, so if we tax cigarettes, but we do not tax the imported cigarettes, then what does George say? But this is not true of such general taxation as falls on all branches of industry alike. As such, taxation does not alter the comparative profitableness of industries. It does not diminish the relative inducement to carry any of them on, and to protect any particular industry from foreign competition on account of such general taxation is simply to enable those engaged in it to throw off their share of a general burden. Yes, this is a big connection. Maybe he'll go into a more here, but the idea that a particular industry being favored, and how that connects to the whole of that country's across all industries is important. I feel like we've talked about that previously. But maybe we'll dig into it more here in a moment, and by in a moment, I mean next week. George proposing a Band-Aid sandwich? Question mark. Well, I don't know. I doubt it. Of course, we still are only in chapter 15, and we know that it isn't until chapter 26. This was my Wikipedia article edit to link this to the unabridged version of Protection and Free Trade, which we are reading, whereas the Wikipedia page used to link to an abridged version of Protection or Free Trade, but it's not until chapter XXVI that we learn that free trade means free production. To fully free production, it is necessary not only to remove all taxes on production, but also to remove all other restrictions on production. True free trade, in short, requires that the active factor of production, labor, shall have free access to the passive factor of production, land. To secure this, all monopoly of land must be broken up, and the equal right of all to the use of the natural elements must be secured by the treatment of the land as the common property and usufruct of the whole people. Usufruct is a limited real right, real talking about like real estate, real property, land, is a real right found in civil law and mixed jurisdictions that unites the two property interests of usus and fructus. Usus is the right to use or enjoy a thing possessed directly and without altering it, and fructus is the right to derive profit from a thing possessed, for instance, by selling, it's like fruit and corn or whatever. Janning says, "Lol, was the whole book read into the congressional record or only the abridged version?" um, Progress and Poverty was read into Congress. Was Protection or Free Trade read into Congress? Oh yeah, you're right here. Oh, maybe I was wrong. Protection or Free Trade was the first book to be entirely read into congressional record. It was read aloud by 5 Democratic congressmen. Ah, interesting. I mixed that up. Well, with that, go forth and tax well, my friends. Tax well. Uh, See ya.